Hey parents, this is my video to prepare you for the Module B assessment for ELA. I apologize that the tripod is showing in this. I haven't quite got like a video studio going for these videos right now. Okay, so here we have a article or a passage about the invasive Burmese python. So the first thing I want your scholar to do is to read this carefully and to kind of stop and take some notes. So we start off, Burmese pythons are known for being powerful. And right off the bat, I'm going to highlight that because we've been studying words that end with full. So that might come up later in this test, okay? They often look like a thick camouflaged coil resting in the grass. In fact, in many ways, pythons act a lot like Florida's native snakes. Okay, so once I see them comparing two things, the pythons with Florida native snakes, I want your child to be thinking comparison. They are comparing two things. Okay, comparison. So then we have here a caption. This is a picture, obviously, and then there's a caption. And your child's learning about text features like photographs and captions. So I'm going to highlight that, and I've taught your children to do that too, and to write the word caption next to it, because at some point they might be asked about a caption, okay? And they need to know where to look. Then it says non-native versus native snake. So I see the abbreviation for versus. I know that that's also a comparison word. So Burmese pythons are solitary. And we've been talking a lot about solitary. That means they like to be alone. Animals. They spend their days alone hunting for prey or hiding in the dense Everglades. They are non-native to Florida and have become an invasive species. Burmese pythons and native Florida snakes like the black racer are both, okay, that's another word that's letting me know this is probably a comparison, both reptiles with smooth scales. They are both carnivores, meaning they eat meat. They also both use camouflage to hide from predators and prey. However, that's another word, they're about to tell us how they're different. The two animals are different in important ways. Burmese pythons are constrictors, meaning they wrap around their prey to squeeze it, but now they're telling us how these other ones are different. So that's a comparison word, but Florida's native snakes mostly bite their prey. Pythons are also much longer and heavier than, so when we see than, we're comparing two things, native snakes, sometimes reaching over 20 feet in length, making them exceptionally large. Okay, now we have a heading, hunting habits. Burmese pythons and native snakes have a lot in common. Okay, that's comparing them again. When they hunt, like comparing native snakes, pythons use their sense of smell to track their prey. One study found that Burmese pythons and native snakes have special heat sensing pits on their face that help them find warm-blooded animals even in the dark. A helpful feature of the native black racer is its speed, allowing it to quickly chase down frogs and small rodents. The python, however, is a patient hunter. Once it catches its prey, its flexible jaw allows it to swallow animals much wider than its own head, including deer and alligators. Scientists are working hard to protect native species from the python, which has few natural predators. This is a word we've talked a lot about in this unit, predators, in Florida. What's next? Scientists hope to continue learning about how the Burmese python has impacted the Florida Everglades. They are studying their movement and hunting habits to find ways to control the invasive population. They want to learn more about how native animals can be protected from the python's enormous appetites. Scientists hope that studying the relationship, so that's telling me these things are compared, between the invasive python and the native snake will help them understand more about how different species compete for resources. After all, if a non-native species can thrive so well, it might change how we classify and protect local wildlife. Okay, now we have our glossary. This is where words are defined. So your child, I would recommend they put a big box around that. And we know words are being defined here. They're going to define words. Okay, so the first question. How does the glossary, so I know I'm looking in this box and I'm not looking anywhere else. How does the glossary help the reader understand the passage, the invasive Burmese python? It defines the word snake. Do you see the word snake up there? No. So we're crossing that right out. It illustrates. Illustrate means a picture. There are no pictures there, so we're crossing that out. Okay, illustrate means there should be a picture. If you don't see a picture, cross that out. Sorry, I got a little exuberant with my circle here. It defines, well, we know glossaries define, it defines the word powerful. Yes, I see powerful, full of strength, so that looks likely. Or it lists the different headings. These are headings. What's next? Non-native versus native snakes, hunting habits. The glossary does not list different headings, so you should not be checking that. That is not what's going on here. So now you know it's C. It defines. A glossary defines words. So now the next question is, how does the caption help the reader better understand the passage, the invasive Burmese python? So you're going back to this first page, and your caption is this part right here. So your answer has to be in this caption. So 1, it names the parts of a python's jaw. No. It just says a Burmese python coils its body and camouflages with the grass. So no. 2, it tells more information about the python's predators. Nope. It coils its body and camouflages with the grass. It shows what the python looks like when coiled and camouflaged in the grass. That sounds likely. Or it lists different headings. Again, headings are things like non-native versus native snakes, hunting habits, or what's next. This is not a list of headings, so that's a no. Okay, so that tells me C. So your child should be able to get the glossary and caption questions tomorrow. No problem just from that, okay? Then they're gonna read a paragraph. Burmese, and this was in the passage, so they need to know that this paragraph below was something they already read in the passage. Burmese pythons are constrictors, meaning they wrap around their prey to squeeze it, but Florida's native snakes, so but tells me I'm comparing, mostly bite their prey. Pythons are also much longer and heavier than native snakes, sometimes reaching over 20 feet in length. So in 3rd grade, we're only going to talk about these types of text structure, cause and effect, chronology, and comparison. We won't be doing problem and solution. They'll do that in 4th grade. But I've seen all these words that make me think comparison. I saw both, however, different, but, than, a lot in common, like. Okay, this is telling me that I think we got some comparison going on. Chronology would mean they gave you order of events, like in order, you know, like in 1912, we had this happen. In 1930, this happened. We did not see anything like that, so I'm crossing that out. Cause and effect is this happened and then this happened as a result, okay? If they were maybe talking about how these Burmese pythons got escaped, like how they were let free by their owners, that might be cause and effect, but they didn't get into that. What we have here is comparison. So if you saw those comparison words, it's comparison. So what is a central idea? We've learned in our class, central idea has to do with the topic and what you learned, and some relevant, meaning on topic, has to do closely related details, okay? So Burmese pythons are the largest snakes in the world. That may well have been mentioned in the article, but that is not the central idea of all this. Burmese pythons are invasive species that have important differences from Florida's native snakes. Yes, they talked about that a lot. Scientists are working to find new native snake species. They did not say anything about that. Burmese pythons should be kept as pets. That's debatable. That's how this all happened, and they did not talk about that at all in our article, okay? So we know B. So it's a lot of test-taking strategies here. Next question. Which detail from the invasive Burmese python best supports So this detail better go along with what we said up here, okay? Best supports the central idea. Pythons are carnivores, meaning they eat meat. Does that have anything to do with them being an invasive species? I don't think so. They're a patient hunter. That's true, they are a patient hunter, but that's not telling me about the important differences from Florida native snakes. Pythons are constrictors, while native snakes mostly bite their prey. Okay, that's telling me a little bit about how they're different. Or they use special heat sensing pits on their face. They said both of them did that, so I'm gonna go with C here. Now in the passage, the invasive Burmese python, how does the author develop the purpose? So their purpose is either gonna be to entertain, inform, or persuade. And they're telling us right away that it's to inform. So there better be some facts, okay? By describing the history of how the python came to live in the Everglades, they didn't really talk about that. They didn't talk about how they've been released. By describing how scientists study other reptiles, turtles, and lizards, I did not hear anything about that in this article. By giving examples of how pythons are similar to and different from native snakes, that sounds reasonable. Or by giving examples of ways the reader can donate to python conservation. I did not hear any talk about that. So we know that it is number 6. Okay. Select evidence from the passage that best supports the author's purpose in part A. So she's got her purpose, that she's informing us about the fact that they are similar and different between Burmese pythons and Florida native snakes. So this Burmese pythons and native Florida snakes are both reptiles and have smooth scales. That tells me something about how they're similar. The python's flexible jaw allows it to swallow animals. That may well be true, but they were talking about the purpose is how they're similar and different. The pythons are solitary animals. That's true, but not telling me how they're similar and different. And they're both carnivores. Okay, that's true. But I feel like this is a better example of telling us the author's purpose. I don't know, that's what I'm thinking. Okay, in this section, hunting habits. So this is important. They need to go back and find the section called hunting habits. And unfortunately on this copy, it spreads across 2 pages, but it's gonna have to be in this section. This is where the answer is. They're gonna try to trick your scholar and put information in other parts, but it's gonna be in this part I just highlighted yellow, okay? So the question is, how does the author develop the purpose of informing the reader about the differences in the hunting methods? So this has to be about hunting methods. By describing different types of snakes, that's not telling me anything about hunting. By describing how the native black racer solves problems, again, not telling me about hunting methods. By describing solutions on how to help pythons find food, I didn't see any solutions like, here, Mr. Python, find food this way. No. But describing a study that found native snakes and Burmese pythons use heat-sensing pits to locate food. It definitely talked about that. It said, there was, in a recent study, one study, it says right here, one study found that Burmese pythons and native snakes have special heat sensing pits. So it's right there in that article. So we know it's this. It described the heat sensing pits. Okay, I know this is going long, but real quick, helpful. Whenever something has full at the end, you're gonna say full of. Now this is pretty obvious, helpful is full of help. Sometimes it might be like wonderful and you need to say like full of amazement, but you need to figure out what that word means. And whenever you see full at the end, it means it's full of. So this is full of help. And last, a summary. So summary should include a sentence that really talks about the whole article, not some minor detail. So pythons can do tricks with playing with balls. I didn't hear anything about that. The Burmese python is an invasive species that is much larger than native Florida snakes and uses constriction to hunt. That sounds plausible. That sounds like something we've talked about. Florida native snakes are constrictors, and that's not even true. And pythons can swim fast. I don't know. We didn't talk about that. So that's B. Okay. Thank you, parents. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and discuss it with your students. Bye-bye.